I stood in the center of the Woodson Estate's grand, glittering ballroom, sipping a glass of cheap, sparkling water when my fiancé's mother shoved a check for $50,000 into my chest and loudly declared me street trash in front of 300 elite guests. She had no idea that the modest, scuffed silver ring on my right hand bore the ancient crest of the Castiglione family, the most feared, wealthy, and powerful syndicate dynasty on the eastern seaboard. What happened next would permanently erase her family's name from high society, and she would be the architect of her own spectacular ruin. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far this story reaches. The air inside the Woodson mansion was thick with the scent of imported white orchids, expensive French perfume, and the unspoken, suffocating arrogance of old Wanao. I stood near the edge of the sprawling marble dance floor, trying to make myself as small and inconspicuous as possible. My dress was a simple, unbranded navy blue sheath that I had bought off the rack at a mid-tier department store. Compared to the sea of custom Vera Wang, Oscar de la Renta, and dripping diamond necklaces that surrounded me, I looked exactly like what they all assumed I was: an interloper, a charity case, a temporary mistake that Marcus, the golden heir to the Woodson real estate empire, was going through. I had met Marcus 8 months ago at the small, independent bookstore where I worked as a manager. I was shelving first editions of 19th century poetry. He had come in looking for a gift for his father. At the time, he seemed charming, grounded, and entirely detached from the toxic elitism that usually accompanied generational wealth. He had pursued me with a relentless, boyish enthusiasm. He loved my modest apartment, my quiet life, and the fact that I didn't care about his family's trust funds. Or so I thought. If you love stories about true identities being revealed and arrogant people getting exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss what happens next. The truth was, my quiet life was a carefully constructed facade. I was not Ilera, the bookstore manager, struggling to pay rent and clipping coupons for groceries. I was Ilera Castiglione. My father, Don Vincenzo Castiglione, was the undisputed head of the largest syndicate operation on the coast. Our wealth made the Woodsons look like petty cashiers. Our family owned the shipping lanes, the unions, the luxury hotels, and the very politicians the Woodsons paid thousands of dollars to lobby. But growing up in the shadow of the syndicate had been entirely suffocating. Since I was a child, my life had been dictated by security protocols, armed guards, bulletproof vehicles, and the constant, paranoia-inducing reality of my father's world. I had never known if a friend liked me for my personality or feared me for my last name. I had never known if a boy wanted to date me or if he was simply trying to leverage an alliance with my father. I wanted to be loved for myself. I wanted to be valued for my mind, my kindness, and my spirit, not for the terrifying power my bloodline commanded. So 3 years ago, with my father's reluctant blessing, I had gone off the grid. I dropped my last name, moved to a different city, and built a life of ordinary, beautiful mediocrity. If they don't respect you as a commoner, Alara, my father had warned me on the day I moved out, his dark eyes intense and sorrowful, they do not deserve you as a queen. The world is full of people who measure a soul by the silk of its garments. Do not let them break you. I hadn't let them break me. But tonight, at my own engagement party, the Woodsons were certainly trying. Marcus had been distant all evening. He was standing on the opposite side of the room, laughing too loudly with his former fraternity brothers, leaving me to navigate the shark-infested waters of his mother's social circle alone. Eleanor Woodson was a terrifying force of nature. She was a woman who communicated entirely in microaggressions and thinly veiled insults. her face pulled tight by expensive surgeries, her eyes constantly scanning the room for anyone who dared to be less than perfect. "Elara, dear," Eleanor's voice purred behind me. I turned to see her approaching, flanked by two of her closest confidants, women who looked like they dined on the misery of the working class. "I see you haven't touched the beluga caviar. Is the texture too challenging for a less refined palate? I can have the kitchen staff make you a grilled cheese if that's more comfortable." The two women beside her tittered, their laughter sounding like breaking glass. I kept my spine perfectly straight. I did not flinch. "The caviar is lovely, Mrs. Woodson. I'm simply saving room for the main course. Thank you for your concern." Eleanor's smile was as cold as a morgue. "Well, we wouldn't want you going hungry. We know how hard you must work down at that little bookshop. It's so quaint how you pretend it's a real career." She sighed dramatically, adjusting a diamond bracelet that cost more than most people's homes. I told Marcus that everyone has a rebellious phase. He enjoys slumming it for now, playing the savior, but eventually reality must set in. Blood tells, Ilera, breeding matters. You can put a stray dog in a diamond collar, but it will still dig in the trash. I felt a hot spike of righteous anger flare in my chest, but I pushed it down, burying it beneath a glacier of practiced calm. My father had taught me that whoever loses their temper first loses the war. Dignity under pressure was the Castiglione way. I believe true breeding is shown through graciousness to one's guests, Mrs. Woodson, I replied quietly, my voice even and polite. Her eyes narrowed to predatory slits. The polite mask slipped just a fraction. "We will see about that, little girl. Enjoy the champagne. It's the most expensive thing you'll ever taste." As she swept away, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and malice, I looked across the room at Marcus. He had seen the interaction. He had watched his mother corner me, insult me, and demean me, and he had simply turned his back, taking another sip of his scotch. The realization hit me with a sickening, heavy thud. Marcus didn't want a partner, he wanted a prop. He wanted a quiet, subservient, easily controlled wife who would be so grateful for his wealth that she would endure any abuse his family hurled at her. He didn't love my simplicity. He loved my perceived vulnerability. The evening dragged on, a slow, agonizing parade of whispered insults and deliberate exclusions. I was seated at the far end of the head table during dinner, effectively isolated from Marcus and his immediate family. The waitstaff, taking their cues from Eleanor, consistently skipped my wine glass and served my courses last, cold and unappetizing. I endured it all with silent grace. I engaged in polite conversation with the elderly, deaf great-uncle seated to my left. I did not complain. I did not cry. Crying was a currency I would never give them. It was during the dessert course that the only moment of genuine warmth occurred. "They're treating you abominably, you know." The voice was low, rich, and rumbling with quiet indignation. I looked up to see a man sliding into the empty chair to my right. He was tall, dressed in a sharply tailored charcoal suit that contrasted starkly with the generic black tuxedos of the other men. He had dark, perceptive eyes and a strong, intelligent jawline. This was Julian, Marcus's cousin, the black sheep of the Woodson family. Julian was an architect who had famously refused to join the family's predatory real estate firm, choosing instead to design affordable, sustainable housing in urban centers. He was wealthy, yes, but he possessed something the rest of his family entirely lacked: a soul. "I'm fine, Julian," I said, offering him a small, genuine smile. "It's just one night." "It shouldn't be any nights," Julian countered, his jaw ticking with frustration as he looked down the table at Marcus. "Marcus is a coward. He should be down here, sitting beside you, telling his mother to back off. If you were mine..." He stopped, clearing his throat, a faint flush creeping up his neck. If you were my fiancé, I would never let anyone speak to you the way Eleanor just did. I looked at him, truly looked at him. Julian had always been kind to me. During the few family dinners I had attended, he was the one who asked about my favorite books, who engaged me in debates about history and art, who looked at me not as a peasant to be pitied, but as an equal to be respected. He saw me. He had seen my worth long before there was any title or syndicate money attached to my name. "Why do you stay, Julian?" I asked softly. "In this family, you're nothing like them." Julian sighed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Obligation. A misguided hope that maybe I can steer the ship away from the rocks." "But nights like tonight?" He looked at me, just his eyes full of a strange, fierce, protective warmth. "Nights like tonight make me want to burn the whole ships down. You don't deserve this, Alara. You are twice the woman of anyone in this room." He reached out and gently touched my hand, his fingers brushing against the scuffed silver ring on my right hand. He paused, looking at the intricate, heavy crest etched into the metal, a sword, a rose, and a crown. "This is an interesting piece," Julian murmured, tracing the edge of the crest. "It looks incredibly old. 14th century Italian? The metalwork is extraordinary. It's not something you find in a vintage shop." I felt a brief flicker of panic, but I kept my face smooth. "It's a family heirloom. It belonged to my father." Julian looked up from the ring, his dark eyes locking onto mine with piercing intensity. He didn't push, he didn't ask questions. He just nodded slowly, as if a profound puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "It suits you," he said softly. "It looks like the ring of a queen. If you're loving this story so far and you want to see Eleanor get the shock of her life, don't go anywhere. This is where it gets incredibly good. Hit subscribe now." The tension in the room began to shift, thickening like a storm gathering on the horizon. The dinner plates were cleared, and the clinking of glasses signaled the beginning of the toasts. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach as Eleanor van der Woodsen stood up, tapping a manicured fingernail against her crystal champagne flute. The room of 300 people fell instantly silent. Eleanor glided to the center of the dance floor, holding a wireless microphone. She looked radiant, triumphant, and utterly lethal. "Family, friends, esteemed colleagues," Eleanor began, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate a transition. My son Marcus has always been a man of boundless generosity. Ever since he was a little boy, he has brought home wounded birds, stray dogs, and broken things, desperately trying to fix them." The crowd chuckled softly. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Beside me, I felt Julian go entirely rigid. When Marcus told us he was marrying Ilara, a girl with no background, no family of note, and no prospects to speak of, a girl who manages a little bookshop, well, we were naturally concerned. Eleanor paused, making a show of looking at me with faux theatrical pity. "We are a family that has built this city. We carry a legacy, and bringing someone from the lowest rungs of society into our fold is a risk." The silence in the room was now absolute, suffocating, and heavy with secondhand embarrassment. I could feel the stares of 300 people burning into my skin. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the floor, his face pale, swirling his drink. He wasn't going to stop her. "But," Eleanor continued, her voice rising with cruel theatricality, "we are nothing if not charitable. We are willing to tolerate this little social experiment, provided boundaries are set." She gestured to a lawyer standing near the edge of the room. He stepped forward and handed her a thick, leather-bound folder. Eleanor opened it, pulling out a crisp single sheet of paper. She then walked directly toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble floor. Have you ever been deeply underestimated or humiliated by someone who thought they were better than you? Drop a comment and tell me how you handled it. Eleanor stopped directly in front of me. She shoved the piece of paper into my hands. Attached to it was a cashier's check. $50,000, Alara, Eleanor said, her voice amplified by the microphone, ensuring every single guest heard her. Consider it a severance package. Or if you insist on forcing my son into this farce of a marriage, consider it your entire allowance for the rest of your life. This is an ironclad prenuptial agreement. You get nothing else. No shares, no property, no access to our accounts. You will be a guest in our world. You are street trash, my dear, and we are simply buying you a slightly cleaner alley to sleep in. A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was one thing to be classist. It was another to execute a public financial execution at an engagement party. Mom, that's enough, Marcus finally mumbled, half-heartedly stepping forward. Sit down, Marcus, Eleanor snapped, not breaking eye contact with me. I am protecting your future from a gold digger. I looked down at the check. $50,000. To the Vanderwoodsons, it was a weapon. To my family, it was what we spent on floral arrangements for a minor holiday. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't throw the drink in her face. Instead, I slowly, deliberately folded the check in half, then in half again, and placed it calmly on the table. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my unbranded navy dress. I looked Eleanor dead in the eye, my posture perfectly aligned, projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying calm. Mrs. Vanderwoodson, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the massive room without the aid of a microphone. The acoustic training of my childhood had taught me how to project authority from the diaphragm. You have made a grave, irreversible miscalculation tonight. You chose cruelty when kindness cost you absolutely nothing. You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed my simplicity was poverty. Eleanor scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her heavily Botoxed brow. Oh, please, spare us the tragic heroine speech. Just sign the paper and accept your place. I didn't break eye contact. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my cell phone. I pressed a single number on speed dial. I held the phone to my ear. It's time, I said into the receiver. I hung up and dropped the phone back into my purse. Time for what? Eleanor demanded, her voice shrill, suddenly losing its practiced smoothness. Are you calling an Uber? Good, use the service entrance. I didn't answer her. I just stood there, completely still, waiting. Trust me, you won't believe what happens next. The first sign that the world was about to end for the Vanderwoodson family was the sound. It started as a low, throbbing vibration, a bass note that seemed to hum through the marble floorboards and rattle the crystal champagne flutes on the tables. The guests murmured nervously, looking around. The vibration grew into a mechanical roar. Through the massive, floor-to-ceiling stained glass windows that looked out over the estate's circular driveway, the beams of high-intensity headlights cut through the darkness. Not one car, not two. A fleet of 12 identical armored jet-black SUVs tore up the pristine gravel of the Vanderwoodson driveway. They moved with terrifying military precision, forming a perfect semicircle around the main entrance, blocking the gates, sealing off the property. What is the meaning of this? Eleanor screeched, dropping her microphone. Marcus, call security, call the police. Marcus was frozen, his mouth hanging open as he stared out the window. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom burst open. The Vanderwoodsons' private security detail, 3 large men in suits, were effortlessly shoved aside into the foyer by the sheer force of the men entering. 20 men strode into the ballroom. They did not look like standard security. They were dressed in impeccably tailored, bespoke Italian suits, midnight black with deep burgundy ties, the syndicate colors. They moved in terrifying unison, their faces devoid of all emotion, radiating a lethal, undeniable violence that made the room's temperature plummet. The elite guests, the billionaires, the socialites, they shrank back in absolute terror, parting like the Red Sea. They recognized power when they saw it, real power, not trust fund power, bloody, ancient, unstoppable power. The men formed two perfect lines, creating a wide aisle from the entrance directly to where I stood. Then, the sound of slow, heavy footsteps echoed from the foyer. A man walked into the ballroom. He was in his late 50s, his silver hair swept back immaculately. He wore a three-piece suit of charcoal wool, a heavy gold watch gleaming on his wrist, and a long black cashmere overcoat resting on his shoulders like a king's mantle. His eyes were dark, calculating, and carried the weight of 1,000 empires. It was Don Vincenzo Castiglione, the boss of bosses, my father. Beside him walked his underboss, carrying a velvet cushion. The silence in the room was so absolute you could hear the rapid, terrified breathing of the guests. Eleanor's face had drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. She recognized him. Everyone in high society knew the face of the man who secretly pulled the strings of the city's commerce. My father did not look at Eleanor. He did not look at Marcus. He did not acknowledge the 300 terrified people in the room. He walked past them as if they were nothing more than dust on the floorboards. He walked directly up to me. He stopped. The terrifying, ruthless syndicate boss, the man who could topple governments with a phone call, looked down at me, and his harsh face softened into an expression of overwhelming, unconditional love. He took his hands out of his pockets and gently cupped my cheeks. Principessa mia, he murmured in deep, gravelly Italian, his voice echoing in the dead, silent room. My princess, I warned you about these peasants. You were right, Papa, I said softly, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. I'm ready to come home. My father turned slightly, gesturing to his underboss. The man stepped forward and offered the velvet cushion. On it sat the Castiglione matriarch's necklace, a staggering, blindingly beautiful cascade of flawless rubies and diamonds that had been in our family for 400 years. It was a piece of jewelry that belonged in a museum. My father lifted it and clasped it around my neck. The weight of it was familiar. It felt like armor. Then, my father turned slowly to face Eleanor van der Woodsen. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, abyssal darkness that made Eleanor physically stumble backward. You, my father said. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His whisper was louder than a bomb. You called my blood street trash. Eleanor was trembling so violently she dropped her clutch. The diamonds on her wrist clattered against the table. I didn't know, she stammered, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. Mr. Castiglione, please. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible, terrible mistake. I thought she was just a... You thought she was someone without power, I interrupted, my voice slicing through the air like a blade. I stepped out from behind my father, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. The rubies at my throat caught the chandelier light, dripping like blood. You thought I was vulnerable. You didn't want to know me, Eleanor. You just wanted to know what you could extract from me and what you could inflict upon me. Marcus suddenly rushed forward, his face a mask of desperate, sweaty panic. Alara, baby, please, we can fix this. I love you. I didn't know who your father was. If I had known, I would have... You would have what, Marcus? I asked, looking at him with absolute, freezing contempt. You would have treated me like a human being? You would have defended me against her cruelty? That is exactly the point. You only defend what you fear or what can profit you. You are a coward, and I really won't miss you. I turned to my father. Let's go, Papa. The air in here is stale. Of course, my heart, my father said. But before we turned, he looked at Eleanor one last time. By tomorrow morning, Vander Woodson Real Estate will lose its primary shipping contracts. The unions will strike on all your high-rise developments. Your lines of credit with the coastal banks will be indefinitely suspended. These are not threats, Eleanor. These are simply consequences. You tried to buy my daughter for $50,000. Tomorrow I will buy your entire legacy for pennies, and I will bulldoze it. Eleanor let out a sharp, choked sob and collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The surrounding guests, the people she had tried so desperately to impress, physically backed away from her, isolating her entirely. She was radioactive. Her social and financial ruin was absolute, happening in real time, in front of the very audience she had summoned to witness my humiliation. I began to walk down the aisle of my father's men, the heavy rubies resting against my collarbone, my head held incredibly high. But I stopped halfway down the room. I turned around and looked at the head table. Julian was standing exactly where I had left him. He wasn't cowering, he wasn't trembling. He was looking at me with a mixture of shock, awe, and a deep, undeniable respect. Julian, I called out, the room still dead silent. He met my eyes. You said you wanted to burn the ships down, I said, a small, true smile touching my lips. The ships are burning. Do you want to walk out of here with me, or do you want to stay in the ashes? Julian didn't hesitate for a single second. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, threw his napkin onto the table, and walked away from his family. He walked past Eleanor's sobbing form. He walked past Marcus's shattered, pathetic face. He walked right up to me, extending his arm. I looped my arm through his. Together, flanked by my father and 20 syndicate guards, we walked out of the Vander Woodson estate, leaving them entirely in ruins. 6 months later, the Vander Woodson name was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms of the city. As my father had promised, their real estate empire collapsed under the weight of sudden, inexplicable union strikes, suspended loans, and canceled contracts. Eleanor was forced to sell the grand estate where she had tried to ruin me, moving into a modest condo on the edge of town, entirely abandoned by her high society friends. Marcus, stripped of his trust fund, was last heard to be working a mid-level sales job, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of his former glory. I never looked back. I didn't return to the bookshop, but I didn't disappear into the syndicate's shadowy underworld either. With my true identity out in the open, I used my family's massive resources to fund the things I actually cared about. I opened a chain of massive, free community centers and libraries across the city's poorest districts, and I didn't do it alone. Julian and I spent the next 6 months building something real. We didn't rush into an engagement. We actually dated. We traveled. We designed buildings together. He was the chief architect for all of my community projects, using Castiglione funding to build the sustainable, affordable housing he had always dreamed of. My father, surprisingly, adored him. A man who stands up for a woman when she has nothing, Don Vincenzo had told me privately, is a man who can be trusted when she has everything. Julian didn't care about my title, and he didn't fear my father's power. He just loved me. He loved the girl in the navy blue dress who liked 19th century poetry, and he loved the syndicate heiress who burned down his toxic family's empire. We learn a lot about people not by how they treat those in power, but by how they treat those they believe have none. Worth exists independent of recognition. Your value is not dictated by your bank account, your job title, or the family name you carry. Cruelty always, inevitably, reveals the perpetrator, never the victim. The Vander Woodsons thought they were exposing my lack of worth, but all they did was expose their absolute lack of humanity. True victory isn't about petty revenge. True victory is living well, living authentically, and letting karma or a fleet of 12 black SUVs handle the rest. The right person will see your crown long before you ever put it on. Have you ever had a moment where someone finally saw your true worth after everyone else underestimated you? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story brought you satisfaction, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your story isn't over, and neither are ours. See you in the next video.